Today, the U.S. withdraws its troops from Syria.
The Kurds have lost air support, which the U.S. was integral in providing. It's potentially lost intelligence in terms of its place in terms of Syria. It's definitely been weakened.
We'll look at Syria's ongoing transition from U.S. foe to cautious ally. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. Hi. So before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode. We do read them. It's a really good, useful guide for us to figure out where your head's at. What do you think of the topic? What do you think about the decision from the U.S. to withdraw troops from Syria after 10 years? And remember, if you're on your favorite podcast app, you can leave us a review, and a 5-star rating doesn't hurt either. It does help the show.
My name's Natacha Danon. I work for Syria Direct. I'm the executive director at Syria Direct, and I'm based in Damascus, Syria.
So, Natacha, you've been reporting about Syria for years now, both before and after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. I mean, there's so much happening every day. Can you put into words like what it's like there, how you've managed to keep up with all of the pace of change since this major event, December 2024?
Things have been evolving very rapidly in Syria. There was first the fall of the regime.
A dynastic rule that survived 5 decades, including uprisings and civil wars, fell in just a matter of days. A lightning assault by fighters late last year resulted in the takeover of the capital, Damascus.
And then in March of 2025, there were massacres along the Syrian coast that targeted primarily Alawites.
Hundreds of people from Syria's Alawite religious minority have been killed in the worst violence there since the fall of dictator al-Assad in December. The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said it had received reports of revenge killings by the new government's security forces in the coastal region.
And then, of course, in July of last year as well, there were sectarian massacres against Druze.
Hundreds of people are confirmed dead and tens of thousands displaced in Syria's southern Sueda province. Fighting there has pitted Druze and Bedouin communities against each other and also involved government forces.
So it's been rocked by periodic instability. The Syrian parliament has yet to take form. A series of members of parliament have been appointed, but the remaining members of parliament have yet to be appointed by the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Sharaa. Continuing to look out closely what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some really significant developments in, the past few weeks. The big one is that the last remaining U.S. troops have now finally pulled out of Syrian regional bases, which is effectively ending a 10-year presence in the country. I was thinking before we talk about why they left, maybe we could start with some history. Why were these troops there in the first place?
Sure. So U.S. troops essentially deployed to Syria to combat the threat posed by ISIS, the Islamic State. In 2014, the U.S. provided sustained air support to what at the time was the YPG, the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is a transnational Kurdish organization that's waged an insurgency against the Turkish state for decades. So these forces were on the ground in Kobani fighting off a siege that was imposed by ISIS, and the U.S. stepped in and provided air support.
Their target is the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. The U.S. Central Command says that a mix of fighter jets, bombers, drone and Tomahawk missiles were used against 14 ISIL targets near Al-Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, Al-Hasaka and Al-Bukamal.
And that relationship continued until the territorial defeat of ISIS in 2019. And until the U.S. essentially withdrew support from this, what was Kurdish-led, but overwhelmingly Arab force called the Syrian Democratic Forces.
Right. So the troops were brought in sort of at the height of the civil war. That war is essentially over. But I wonder how you explain what's behind this withdrawal. Is this about the fight against ISIL being over, or is it more about, you think, shifting U.S., United States priorities?
Sure. I mean, for starters, the fight against ISIS is far from over. We've already had ISIS attacks at checkpoints in Raqqa city in particular. And analysts have warned that ISIS can make a comeback at any time, exploiting the chaos that has been caused by the withdrawal of the Syrian Democratic Forces from mass swaths of territory. and as the government steps in and tries to control those newly gained territories. And to answer your other question, I would say that this recent withdrawal within the last couple of weeks, where the U.S. forces withdrew from their last remaining air base in Syria, was mostly driven by the fact that it was looking to avoid Iranian attacks on U.S. bases. So amidst the war against Iran waged by the U.S. and Israel, there's been a concern that Iran will continue to step up attacks on U.S. assets across the region. So I would say, while it was a long time coming, Trump had in his first term declared that he wanted to withdraw from Syria.
We're knocking the hell out of ISIS. We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon.
It was precipitated by the recent war. However, I think it's a message to his U.S. constituency that essentially the war in Syria is wrapping up, and that he's making good on his promise to withdraw from Syria, even if now the U.S. is entangled more than ever in the Middle East with the war on Iran.
Okay, so Natacha, what does that mean, actually on the ground? I think we're talking about 1,000 troops. What were they doing, and what sort of capabilities, I guess, their Kurdish allies, what type of capabilities have they now lost?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Kurds have lost air support, which the U.S. was integral in providing. It's potentially lost intelligence in terms of its place in terms of Syria. It's definitely been weakened. I mean, with the government offensive that started at the beginning of the year into northeast Syria, you had mass defections by its Arab constituents, which constituted the majority of the Syrian Democratic Forces. However, the YPG, the Syrian branch of the PKK, which has thousands of members, is still a very strong, effective fighting force. It's gained years of experience fighting on the ground against ISIS, as well as across the border to Turkey, where the PKK, the head of the organization, has been waging insurgency against the Turkish state until very recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of an awkward situation. I mean, the U.S. troops were there to train an army that was fighting the old Syrian government. Now the new Syrian government is there, and they're still sort of beefing with the SDF. There was conflicts a few months ago.
The new authorities in Damascus launched an offensive against the group following hostilities and a breakdown in negotiations.
It sounds like there's a lot still to iron out.
Yes. So the SDF was never on the ground to fight against the Assad regime. Its mandate was exclusively to fight against ISIS. However, there are still a lot of things that need to be sorted out between the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces.
The phased transfer of SDF-held areas is not expected to be easy. It involves integrating administrative structures into the state and creating brigades to integrate the SDF into the army. The SDF will also have to expel foreign fighters and hand over its heavy weapons.
So things that may be holding up could be the status of the YPJ, which is the women offshoot of the YPG, the women's fighting force. So the SDF and the self-administration continue to argue that they should be part of the new Syrian army, whereas the Syrian government are quite reluctant to have them integrated, and have been pushing for them to only be integrated into the police force. Other things could include the fact that the SDF are still fighting for greater autonomy. And this could take a wide variety of forms. However, until now, the Kurdish factions have not, or rather Kurdish constituents of the Syrian Democratic Forces have not surrendered weapons yet. The Arab constituents in the Arab majority provinces of Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, who have been surrendering their weapons. So settlement centers were created there. They've given up their weapons. They've provided information in terms of their precise role that they played in the SDF. But while there is discussion about the SDF essentially being downscaled and composed of 3 brigades, so one in Derik, one in Haseke, and one in Kobani, these would be brigades that are entirely composed of former members of the SDF that are then incorporated into the Syrian army. However, until now, there's been very few statements, if at all, from the Syrian government and from the SDF about what is holding up the negotiations.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the timing here, because this U.S. withdrawal coincides with two other very significant developments. One is Syria is offering citizenship to Kurds. This is something that has been decades in the making, and a very, very, very big deal. And the other is the ongoing talks of folding the Kurdish militias into the Syrian army, which you just mentioned. So maybe you can give us a sense of the real sequence of events here, how this all came together. And I guess the bigger question is, from Damascus's point of view, is this all part of a larger effort to solve this Kurdish autonomy puzzle?
Absolutely. So the Syrian government, and specifically Ahmed al-Sharaa himself, has made a significant number of concessions. So starting off with recognition of Kurdish linguistic and cultural rights, including recognition of the Nowruz holiday, which was celebrated for the first time openly in Syria, for the first time in decades, very historic. And you also have the recent nationality law, or rather the granting by presidential decree nationality to stateless Kurds. So in 1962, many Kurds were stripped of their nationality in a census as part of the Syrian government's effort to prevent essentially any form of Kurdish nation states, which they had long been promised by Western powers. So this granting of nationality to stateless Syrian Kurds has been met with great popularity. There have been thousands of people who have gone to centers to register. However, the key limitation being that Kurds in the diaspora, Syrian Kurds in the diaspora, are not able to register, and there is a limited deadline for this to occur.
Yeah, and it's important to note that obviously the Kurds are not a monolith. There's a lot of different factional elements here. And I'm curious about the PKK. It's a Turkish Kurdish militant group that shares ideological roots with the YPG, which, as we said, makes up the Kurdish core of the SDF, which is the Syrian Defense Forces. There's a lot of acronyms here. But how is the PKK reacting to this citizenship proposal? Have there been any mobilizations or statements since this announcement?
So no, there have been no statements by the PKK publicly addressing the granting of nationality to stateless Kurds. However, the role of the PKK is certainly a potential spoiler in this entire equation. So one of the conditions for essentially the forces belonging to Damascus coming into northeast Syria and for any subsequent integration agreement was that essentially blacklisted individuals from the PKK would withdraw from Syria. And that's what we saw happen. So Sipan Hamo, who is a former member of the YPG, the PKK organization, has been appointed as deputy minister of justice, which is a hugely symbolic move, which shows that it's not all members of the PKK who have been blacklisted in Syria. However, individuals blacklisted by Turkey withdrew from northeast Syria towards the mountains and bordering Iraq and Syria. And so for the PKK, Syria was its key territory. So in Turkey, it's been unable to gain territorial control in the same way it was able to in Syria. And while it also has a presence in Iran, it didn't have nearly as much territorial control as in Syria. So the potential for the PKK playing a spoiler effect or impact in this equation is important. There are many in the PKK itself that are unhappy with the fact that the PKK or former elements of the PKK, that YPG, will be joining the Syrian army.
Okay. So on the ground, Kurdish civilians have shouldered years of war, displacement, blockade. Now this all kind of lands at once, right? A U.S. exit combined with the promise of citizenship, but with major strings attached because it might involve conscription. How are people processing this moment? Is it more relief or fear or a mixture of both?
Yeah, so the Syrian Democratic Forces have been key in terms of providing safety from ISIS, but also against Turkey itself. So another actor that could destabilize any ongoing negotiations between the SDF and the Syrian government is, first and foremost, Turkey. Turkey considers the PKK to be a terrorist organization even as peace talks are being held, and the PKK has made unilateral steps to create confidence building. However, Turkey has declared that its red line is that the SDF not integrate into the Syrian army. So if there is not progress made in negotiations, then this could create a serious risk for a Turkish intervention.
Wow. 6 months from now, we're going to know a lot more than we know now. What will you be specifically watching for? What do you think is the most likely thing to break this sort of procession towards progress?
Sure. So as I said, the potential spoil role of the PKK as well as Turkey could play a role. But I don't think there's any appetite neither on the side of the SDF or the Syrian government to engage in any full-fledged confrontation. The Syrian army is still recovering from the bloody massacres that it carried out in the coast last year, but also in Sueda, the Druze majority province of Sueda. So, and these, for example, in the case of Sueda, the Syrian government was not able to take control, let alone a place like Northeast Syria where the SDF have a very strong presence, have now over a decade of experience on the ground fighting ISIS and are very well armed thanks to the US. So I don't think there's any appetite on the part of the Syrian government to engage in serious clashes with the SDF, unless Turkey is prepared to step in and provide air support and to escalate things.
Yeah, I mean, from your reporting in Damascus, do you feel like the government is confident? I mean, not confident because there's so many things that could go wrong, but does it seem like they're optimistic that this is a new Syria and they'll be able to bridge all these seemingly intractable divides?
It's hard to get a clear reading on the Syrian government. There's a lot of different personalities, but I would say the government is going into file of Northeast Syria with awareness, given the concessions it's made. However, the critique is that it's granted linguistic and cultural rights, but it hasn't granted political rights. And there's still a lot of pushback from the Syrian government in terms of anything that's called decentralization, even though that's something that many groups in the country have called for, first and foremost, the Kurds themselves. So without a degree of decentralization, it's unlikely that the Kurds are willing to accept any sort of settlement without that.
Okay. Well, Natacha, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.